Good afternoon, all and everyone. Am I audible, sir, Dada?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, one and all. On behalf of the Department of English, Midnapur College, I extend you all a hearty welcome for today's talk to be delivered by a renowned academician and a professor, Dr. Dipankar Roy from Visva Bharati. And this is our honor and privilege to have a noted academician like him among us today. To introduce him formally would take a lot of time as he has an illustrious career. Uh, However, we would then like to introduce him in these few words. Dr. Dipankar Roy is an associate professor in the Department of English, Visva Bharati. He is the author of In Tagore's Own Country, got published in 2015. Shoda Thako Anonde Shanti Niketone, got published in 2018. And he is the editor of Timeless Tales from Bengal, an anthology of Bangla children's and young adult stories, got published in 2018. He is a contributor to towards Tago in 2004 and the 150th birth anniversary commemorative volume of Visva Bharati. He has written a number of articles and chapters on Tagore and on various other subjects for reputed national and international journals and books. So today we are going to listen him talking on Walter Benjamin and his idea of authorship, reading of the author as producer. Once again, I welcome you, sir, to this virtual platform on behalf of the Department of English, Midnapur College. And we are honored and we are privileged to have you among us. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Tanmay. Thank you indeed. I must offer my heartfelt thanks to the Department of English, Midnapur College as well for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk amongst my students and interact with my students. And let me at the outset categorically state that this is not going to be any scholarly deliberation on the works of Walter Benjamin. I look at this talk primarily as a classroom lecture, and for this particular lecture, I wish to present to my students a PowerPoint presentation, and of course would like to have questions from them once I finish. But before I begin, let me just say a few words because I feel a little bit nostalgic. Since I mentioned my students in Midnapur College and also other students who are studying at the undergrad or postgraduate levels in different colleges and universities, let me honestly state that I too feel like a student when I try to grapple with the ideas of Walter Benjamin because it reminds me of my teachers. And I must mention at least the names of my two teachers who introduced me for the first time to Benjamin's thoughts way back. I was a student of a university, it seems like ages ago, but I was introduced to Benjamin for the first time by my late professor, Professor Arup Rudra of Jadavpur University. Unfortunately, he's no more with us. And I was also very fortunate to have innumerable discussions vis-a-vis Walter Benjamin's writings with another professor of the Department of English in Jadavpur University, Professor Omlan Dasgupta. I pay my homage to these two professors every time I try to speak on Walter Benjamin's ideas. Without them, I would not be in a position to develop any kind of understanding of this great man, but a man with very complicated sets of ideas. So without further ado, let me just go straight to my presentation. And I once again thank Tanmay in particular for organizing this. And I'm also noticing that Tanmay has done a wonderful job by bringing together a number of academicians across the country, if not outside the country, and sharing their inputs with the students of his college as well as other colleges and universities. So I
Thank you.
must offer my heartfelt thanks to Tanmay Kundu. He's doing a wonderful job. So now on to Walter Benjamin. Now, before I begin, just one small clarification. This is just for the record. The university where I teach is called Visva Bharati. That's it. We do not call it Visva Bharati University. And the poster that Tanmay has made refers to my university as Visva Bharati University. I overlooked the fact, but one of my students pointed it out to me. So this is for the record that henceforth anybody associated, if you invite anybody associated with Visva Bharati, just mention Visva Bharati, because this is the name given by none other than Tagore. Now on to another 19th century man from Tagore, to Walter Benjamin. Now, I do not have the intention or even the wherewithal to introduce Benjamin in a talk like this, because most of you know that right now, all across the globe, we have a veritable Benjamin industry. Along with another philosopher, 20th century philosopher and literary critic, Mikhail Bakhtin, Benjamin stocks are going high every single day. As far as I know, at least 4 documentaries have been made on Benjamin, and there are quite a number of blogs and websites dedicated to Benjamin's works and his thoughts and his ideas. And after the publication of his selected writings during the 1970s, several volumes of selected writings, Benjamin's reputation seems to be growing every single day. So this is not an attempt to introduce Benjamin, because Benjamin, as you can see from my slide, Benjamin has written on various subjects, and he was, in a way, a quintessential 19th century man of letters. About Benjamin's character of being a man of letters, Hannah Arendt has some wonderful things to say in her wonderful introduction to Benjamin's book called Illuminations. Arendt says Benjamin was in a way an anachronistic personality. His temperament was that of the 19th century, but unfortunately he lived most of his lives in the 20th century. And nevertheless, Benjamin was one of the great recorders of European modernity, and his books became available in English rather late in the 20th century. Again, there is a similarity between Benjamin and Bakhtin. When we do our literary criticism history of Europe and America, we generally tend to begin from, if we focus on the 20th century, we generally tend to begin from structuralism, new criticism, and onward, and then we go to post-structuralism and later day developments. But it's very difficult to fit in these two towering figures, Walter Benjamin and Mikhail Bakhtin, because they became known to the English-speaking world rather late, but they have made their presence felt in a major way. So in addition to a number of journalistic writings that Benjamin contributed to journals and newspapers, he has got quite a few book-length studies to his credit as well. All of us are familiar with his most famous works, like The Origin of German Tragic Drama, Trauerspiel. This was published in English in the year 1977. Then there are books titled as One Way Street and Other Writings, published in English in 1979. Then Understanding Brecht in 1973. The particular essay that we are going to study today is taken from this particular book called Understanding Brecht. And he also has got a full-length study on Charles Baudelaire. This book is called Charles Baudelaire, a lyric poet in the era of high capitalism. It was translated by Harry John and was published in 1973. Again, along with the similarity with Bakhtin seems to go on and on. I must mention here that along with Bakhtin's full-length study on Dostoevsky, that book is of course called Problems in Dostoevsky's Poetics. Benjamin's book on Baudelaire is often considered as a critical work, which should be considered as a creative work as well. And Benjamin's writing style is aphoristic, cryptic. He seems to draw from the Jewish Kabbalistic writing, and he's also famous for developing his arguments poetically through the use of images, thought images. And one of the most famous images that Benjamin has used is, of course, the angel of history. The image that he uses, of course, he takes that image from Paul Klee's famous painting. He uses this image in his very, very famous essay, one of the last essays that he wrote. It's called Thesis on the Philosophy of History. But there are several stages in Benjamin's writings, although he did not live long. As you can see that he died at the age of 1948. I'm sorry, he died at the age of 48 in the year 1940, and he took his own life. Many of us know the tragic story of how he actually died. I'm not going into the details of his death, but the period that we are focusing right now is the beginning of the 30s, 1930s. And this period, in this period, he seems to be leaving his earlier Zionist phase, earlier mystical phase of writings, because he's getting in touch with Bertolt Brecht and Theodor Adorno. He was getting involved with the Frankfurt School, and with his friendship with Assia Lasses and others, he was also exposed to Marxist ideas and thoughts. And this marks the materialist turn in his writings, 1930s, the beginning of the 1930s. And this was the period in which he wrote quite a few essays, which later they became very, very famous. This was the period in which he dealt with his own ideas, the ideas that he developed, ideas like the auratic art, the concept of the auratic art and the decline of the aura during the age of mechanical reproducibility, and shock experience as the cornerstone of modernist experience, and of course his idea of the aestheticization of politics that he develops in his very famous mechanical reproducibility essay. We'll go into these ideas in greater detail if we have time, but these ideas are relevant for our understanding of the essay that we have right now for our scrutiny, that is the author as producer. This particular essay was to be the part of a large series of lectures that Benjamin was supposed to deliver in Paris. He arrived in Paris in 1933, and he was there as an exile. 1933 is the year in which Germany became too hot a place for people like Benjamin to live, because Hitler was coming to power. We'll come to these details later, but this series of lectures that I'm talking about, it was supposed to have at least 6 lectures. This did not materialize because the organization suddenly fell sick in the beginning of the April 1934, and ultimately Benjamin ended up delivering this one-off lecture. And this lecture was delivered, as you can see, in the Institute for the Study of Fascism. Now, before we enter into the text, let's just take a quick look at certain kinds of contexts out of which this particular essay emerges. Of course, generally speaking, if you look at the left-hand side of our slide, generally speaking, 1920s and 1930s were the decades in which the ravages of the First World War were deeply felt, and this was also the years in which Europe, many countries of Europe were in the process of rebuilding themselves, and urbanization was rampant. And as far as Germany was concerned, from 1919 to 1933, the year in which Hitler came to power, Germany saw the flourishing of art and culture, and also some kind of political stability in the form of Weimar Republic. So this was, historically speaking, this was a period in which the artists and the intellectuals were trying to pick out remnants from the particular tradition that was in shatters, and the intellectuals were also trying to rebuild a new tradition by almost like starting from scratch, by by going back to the power of technology in a major way. The issue of technology will be dealt with in a moment. We go on to the next nodal point, that is the political context. The political context of this essay are rather complex and interesting, and rather fast changing in nature, because on one hand, in the 1920s in the Soviet Russia, all kinds of experiments in the form of social engineering and state-sponsored art and culture were made, and at one point in time, in the beginning of the 1930s, the Soviet artists were trying to go to the villages and interact with the villagers, and to work in farms and introduce mechanical, industrial facilities to the villagers, and introducing technology in the realm of art. And if you consider Germany, this was also the period in which Hitler was gradually becoming more and more powerful, and the left-leaning intellectuals and Jewish intellectuals in particular were finding Germany a place too hot to handle. So the question of art and activism was something that was very burning in this particular period, in countries like Soviet Russia, in countries like Germany, and also in France. In Paris, if you consider Paris, 1934 in Paris was quite an eventful year, in the sense that when the German Socialist Party lost elections to Hitler's party, Paris began to emerge as the last bastion of left ideas and left ideologies. And the intellectuals, left-leaning intellectuals in Paris, were trying to come together and form a movement, and were trying their best to resist a possible fascist uprising in Paris as well. And it so happened that in the month of February in Paris, there was a very rowdy rally organized by right-wing supporters in the streets of Paris. So this rioting was something that shook the left-leaning intellectuals in Paris, and one of the results of this right-wing disturbances was, of course, the establishment of the Institute for the Study of Fascism. So the political scenario out of which a text like the author as producer emerged was very volatile, to say the least. And just as the political scenario was anything but calm and normal, similarly, the impact of political unrest was felt among the intellectuals, among the intelligentsia, and the question, the buzzword became for whom to write, and what would be the commitment, the ideal commitment of a writer or an artist in a broad sense of the term. So ideological battles were being fought both at the right-wing camps as well as the left-wing camps. A number of journals in Paris in those days would ask their readers as to what they thought should be the ideal role of intellectuals in such a situation. And going to Benjamin's own thoughts and Benjamin's own ideas, I would consider the author as producer, the text, having very strong intertextual connections with certain other essays that he wrote around this time. The author as producer figures certain ideas and concepts that Benjamin developed in those writings, if not in a fully fledged manner, but mentioned in those writings. And in the author as producer, he once again went back to these ideas. I single out at least 3 important texts. Little History of Photography, which he wrote when he was in Berlin in 1931. Mind you, I told you that he arrived in Paris in the year 1933, in the beginning of 1933, and he was staying in a hotel, in a very cheap hotel, but he had already completed this essay called Little History of Photography. In this essay, he introduced certain ideas which would also figure in other writings of this period of Benjamin. One is, of course, the idea of auratic art and how photography became responsible for the decline of the aura. In the Little History of Photography, Benjamin also introduces the idea of refunctioning, an idea that was developed primarily by Bertolt Brecht during the years 1929 and 30. We most often talk about Brechtian idea of alienation, but Brecht also developed this other idea, the idea of refunctioning. We'll talk about this idea in greater detail when we enter into the textual discussion. And of course, there's a very interesting thing to note that the author as producer, lost out to the other more famous essay in terms of popularity, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproducibility, an essay that Benjamin wrote in 1935, and it overshadowed the importance and significance of this particular essay. Now, in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproducibility, Benjamin discusses, of course, he discusses auratic art, he discusses the reproducible nature of art in the modern age, but he also discusses 2 binaries, politicization of aesthetics and aestheticization of politics. These two ideas later they became very, very famous. And of course, Benjamin wrote 2 different versions of the essay, What is Epic Theatre? We shall talk about the second version that is published in the year 1939. The first version was published for the first time in 1960s from unpublished manuscripts. So second version is most often considered as the standard version. So there, of course, Benjamin talks at length, discusses at length what he understands as epic theater. And those of you who have already read the essay Author as Producer must have noticed that in the last section of the essay, Benjamin exclusively focuses on Brechtian theater, a new kind of theater that is epic theater. So these are the contexts, these are the historical, political, ideological, and intertextual contexts that we need to keep in mind when we enter into the world of the author as producer. Now, to my mind, the author as producer, although it's not a very long essay, but if you read carefully, you will find that the author as producer has got 3 distinct movements. It is almost as if that the essay has got 3 distinct parts. Now, the first part introduces the function of the author. We'll talk about the first part. I call it the first movement. And then in the next movement, Benjamin builds up on his ideas of literary technique and the refunctioning of art. And in the last movement, Benjamin, as an exemplary manner, takes up Brechtian theater, and he actually kind of prescribes Brechtian theater as an ideal form of art in an age of mechanical reproducibility. We'll go into those movements later on, but if you focus on the first movement, you will find Benjamin begins with a very simple position, that is the author's role in the society. He begins his essay by mentioning Plato, and I would like to read a particular section from Benjamin's writing at this point. It is about the question of autonomy of the writer, as well as the necessary commitment that the writer should have, which we can say in brief as the political tendency of a writer. Generally, we tend to believe that progressive writers, writers believing in a particular ideology, would have a commitment to the political cause, and the bourgeois writer would simply write for the public. You know, if you ask the bourgeois writer, to whom does he commit himself to, where his commitment lies, he would answer that his commitment lies with the readers. But Benjamin makes it absolutely clear, and I quote from writing that he wrote in 1927, and he writes, "It is a truism that political tendencies are implicit in every work of art, every artistic epoch, since after all they are historical configurations of consciousnesses. But just as deeper rock strata emerge only where the rock is fissured, the deep formation of political tendency likewise reveals itself only in the fissures of art history. The technical revolutions are the fracture points of artistic development. It is there that the different political tendencies may be said to come to the surface. In every new technical revolution, the political tendency is transformed." Now, right, so going back to the author as producer as a text, I would say that Benjamin draws a parallel. Benjamin draws an equation between the correct political tendency and literary tendency and the literary quality of the author. According to him, the literary tendency of the author has to have the right literary quality.
So I request you to please bear with us. Please allow us for a few more minutes. Actually, this is a technological glitches, bit unprecedented. We humbly request you to wait for a few more minutes. Dipankar is back. We are grateful to you for your patience. Please bear with us. This is bit unprecedented, and this time we are all are facing this kind of technological glitches.
Tonmoy, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay,
Absolutely.
can we renew my presentation?
Okay, it is visible now.
So is it all right if I start again once more?
No, from that place, how we stopped, we can start from there.
Okay, right. Very good. Right. Apologies for the technical snag. My power supply was interrupted. Thankfully, it is back. So we are back with Benjamin, and it is quite befitting that we have to depend such. Uh, we have to depend so much on technology for this webinar to run smoothly. It is quite befitting because Benjamin, in his essay, champions the potential of technology in the realm of art. Now, coming back to the first movement of the essay, Benjamin tries to draw an equation with a 4-point formula. He mentions political tendency as to be intimately associated with literary tendency of an author. And generally, there was this debate in Benjamin's time in the 1930s that if a writer would have the right kind of commitment, his works would not need any other quality. Benjamin did not subscribe to this view. For Benjamin, literary tendency should and must have all relevant literary qualities. That is to say, an art must qualify in the scale of artistic qualities, irrespective of its political or literary tendency. Now, this particular impasse between literary tendency on one hand, literary quality on the other hand, Benjamin posits the fourth position, that is the position of literary technique. He wants to present literary technique as a solution to the problem of assimilating right literary tendency, right political tendency with the right kind of literary quality. Now, this would help Benjamin in turn to develop his own position as a materialist critic, as somebody who would be able to use his dialectical ways of thinking in untying the texts. For Benjamin, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, I have identified 4 important features of Benjamin's thesis. That first of all is for a critic to evaluate a work of art, it is almost imperative that the artistic work has to be placed inside the living social conditions. That is the conditions of production. The function of art, the making of the art is something that we take into account, but the function of art is also something that we also need to take into account in an age in which technology was changing so many things. If technology was changing people's lives in other spheres, it was almost as if very, very obvious that in the realm of art, the purpose of art, the function of art would also undergo changes. So Benjamin precisely for this reason, wants to take up a new position as a critic. Instead of looking at the artistic work's position to the relations of production, he would rather try to look at the artistic work's position within the relations of productions. That is to say, how that particular work of art is engaging with the productive forces of the times, and how the work of art is coming up with new functions in the production relations. So if somebody looks at a work of art within the relations of production of a particular period, only then that artistic work becomes accessible to materialist analysis. And this will help us to rise. This dialectical way of looking at art would help us rise above another almost insoluble binary, that is the question of form and content in a work of art. Whether the work of art should have the right kind of content. If you are writing for the working class people, is it imperative for you to write about the downtrodden of the society and nothing else? And will the right kind of content will do? Or should we also think of certain formal features, certain formal changes that you need, as an artist, you need to bring about in your work of art? Now, if we move on to the second movement, here we look at a few important nodal points that Benjamin presents in the middle of the essay and develops these points one by one. Of course, the most important point should be related to the technical changes that capitalist modernity, technological modernity were bringing to the society, Western society in general. And of course, technology was also being used in the realms of art. New kinds of art forms were emerging, which were completely technology based. And in addition to technology, in a capitalist mode of production, technological development could not prosper without the investment of capital. So the capitalist entrepreneurs who would invest money in technological developments, even in the realms of art, would try to control the production process. Take, for example, movies. Now, you as a viewer of a movie cannot possibly buy off a movie, just like you can take a novel out of the shelf and buy it for yourself, because a movie making involves a lot of expenditures. So it should be funded by a capitalist entrepreneur, and that movie needs to be, shown to. That movie should have a number of viewers who would collectively pay for the expenses of the movie. So capital was making its presence felt in the realm of art and communication. And if capitalist mode of production would reign supreme, the writer, look at the left-hand corner of the screen, the writer's position vis-a-vis capital would be a position of dependence. The writer's social position would be a dependent social position. And just as we have talked about the movies, we should also look at how technology would bring about, print capitalism would bring about new developments in the realm of communication in the form of the newspaper. Now, newspaper was something that, in a way, democratized literature. Anybody and everybody, theoretically speaking, could contribute to the newspaper. And the column, the letter to the editor column is geared towards that. Anybody could become the writer of a newspaper if one likes. So you see, in addition to technical changes, the changes of the position of the writer, the very notion of an author was undergoing changes because of these technological advancements. So indie intellectuals need to take stock of their own situation, their own changing position in the production process. And because of the technological changes, it was not merely that new genres of writing, new genres of art form were emerging, but the older forms were also undergoing changes. Photography would influence painting, film would influence theater. So older literary forms and journalistic writing would inform all kinds of literary works. So Benjamin identifies this period as a period in which there is a high degree of the recasting of literary forms that was taking place, and the melting down process was pretty visible. Now, regarding this question of novels, have had novels having to deal with cinematic effects, theater having to deal with radio and other forms of popular entertainment. I'm reminded of Mikhail Bakhtin once more here, because in his book The Dialogic Imagination, he writes about how the arrival of novel brought about changes in all other literary forms. He called it the novelization of literature. Similarly, we can say that Benjamin identifies in this period the technologization of literature. Reproducible works of art, arts that were meant to be reproducible. Canned music, radio programs, gramophones, newspapers, and films, all these were meant to be reproduced. And deep inside, they would have qualities which would make them reproducible. So literary forms could not avoid the influence of these technologically reproducible works of art. So this brings us to a very important point that Benjamin picks up in the next section. That is the necessity, the importance of making a functional transformation. Artistic nature of art would undergo changes, but Benjamin is drawing our attention to the function of art as well. Technical innovations would not merely bring about changes in forms and instruments, but technical changes would also posit a question to the author as to what objectives the author or the artist would have in such a technological sphere of artistic activities. So artists would be gifted with newer and newer apparatuses. Technology would bring in one particular technological apparatus after another. For example, first we had the silent movies, and thereafter the sound films made their entry into the arena. Similarly, with photography and with camera becoming smaller and smaller, in the 19th century with daguerreotypes and with older kind of technologies, cameras used to be huge. But in the 20th century, cameras became smaller and smaller, and cameras could capture a particular scene down to its last detail. And that is probably why the entry of camera resulted in the demise of miniature painting. We'll talk about these things later on, but the moot point here, the point that Benjamin is trying to drive home is, for the artist, it is not merely sufficient to make use of a production apparatus, but for the artist, the onus is to change it, to own it, to own the apparatus, to change it, and to transform it into new kind of techniques which would enable the artist to break the shackles from the capitalist production process, would democratize art, and would turn the author into a member of the working class people. Just like the members of the working class people are producers, the artist should also consider himself as a producer of art. So Benjamin is trying to move away from any kind of elitist notion of art, or art being in the realm of the specialists. Now, for analyzing the effects of technical innovations, Benjamin chooses certain areas. We are into the next slide, and here I'm trying to draw your attention to the different areas, different fields in which the technical innovations were making radical changes in the realm of art. I've already mentioned photography, and I've already mentioned newspapers. So here I have got 4 nodal points. Photography is one, illustrated press is another, and radio and canned music is the third. Now, photography as an art form, if you at all consider photography as an art, this particular technology of photography is aimed at mass consumption. Photography as a technical instrument is all for multiple copies. You do not own a photograph just the way you can own a particular painting. So the economic function of photography is for multiple reproductions and for mass consumption. Illustrated press, on the other hand, would newspaper, on the other hand, would have the potential of enlarging the pool of writers. Aldous Huxley, if you happen to come across the work of art essay of Benjamin, in the footnotes of that essay, Benjamin refers to one particular comment made by Aldous Huxley. This comment is about how during the technological innovation, period of technological innovation in the late 19th century and early 20th century, the number of readers increased manyfold. The number of consumers of art increased manyfold. And at the same time, people who produced art also increased in numbers. And so there was, according to Huxley, was a problem of quality. Now, this debasement of art is something that Aldous Huxley laments. But Benjamin, on the other hand, is putting his faith on this particular possibility of multiple copies, possibility of using technology at a mass level, which would help democratize art. So this way, anybody who contributes to this reproducible art would find solidarity with other producers. So everybody who was making music would also feel affinity with sound engineers, with recording artists, and with other technical stuff. So here we talk about a new kind of solidarity that would emerge between artists and technical persons. Similarly, illustrated press would carry photographs. I've talked about photographs, but newspaper photographs, journalistic photographs, according to Benjamin, must have captions. Now, with the use of captions, the ultimate function of that particular photograph, the ultimate impact of that photograph could be controlled and could be directed at a particular awareness among the observers, among the viewers of that particular photograph. So this way, by use of inscriptions, by use of captions, Benjamin opines that the literarization of all conditions of life could take place. So all experience of life could be captured by photography, and at the same time, with the use of word, use of language in the form of captions, photographs could serve certain overt political function. So similarly, in the radio broadcasts, in the recording studio, or for example, recording concert hall music, there can be a possible refunctioning. The idea of refunctioning, of course, Benjamin borrows from Bertolt Brecht. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this arriving at different functions of art would involve the use of new techniques, and that in turn would be able to create right kind of political tendency among the artists. Right. So if you go to the production aspect of mechanically reproducible works of art, where authors are to be treated as producers, the production process would involve solidarity among different producers, where readers or spectators would become collaborators. So the binary opposites between writer and reader, director and actor and audience, performer and listener, these binaries are to be broken down. These binaries are to be melted. Readers and spectators can also become writers or performers. So in a way, readers and spectators would become collaborators for the ultimate function of art in society. So improved apparatus, Benjamin, in his essentialized position of technological developments, championing of technological developments, wants to turn consumers into producers. This is very, very important. And this tendency to turn consumers into producer, active participants in aesthetic experiences, would be the right kind of political tendency, literary tendency that the artists, the writers could have in a technologized world of art. Now, in the last movement, in the third movement, Benjamin zeroes in on his discussion of Brechtian epic theater. In this particular section, Benjamin at the outset makes a distinction between tragedies and operas that were very, very popular before the arrival of epic theater. And these tragedies and operas in the late 19th and early 20th century would involve the usages of newer apparatuses, newer machineries, newer support stuff. But the political function of that apparatus would be very, very traditional. Now, talking about this particular issue of refunctioning, Benjamin makes it absolutely clear that when the artist would get involved in the act of refunctioning, he or she has to undergo two changes. First change is, of course, in the realm of realization of the artist's own position vis-a-vis the production relation. Now, we generally know in the classic materialist reading of history, when the forces of production and the relations of production become at loggerheads, revolution takes place, and this conflict between the forces of production and the relations of production is a major driving force of history. Now, what Benjamin does, he takes this conflict from the level of the economic base to the superstructural level. Even at the realm of superstructure, Benjamin tries to point out that there is a conflict between artists as representatives of productive forces and the relationship of production involving capital, involving artists and consumers. And the artists should first of all realize their own position vis-a-vis the production process. And after realizing his or her own position, the artist should make a conscious attempt to bring about technical changes, to bring about changes in the realm of apparatus, to create new kind of revolutionary art, to new kind of proletariat art. An artist, a bourgeois artist, can never become a proletariat simply because his education, his exposure to education would never let him be a proletariat through and through. But the proletarization of artists can also take place. And this can take place in the form of Brechtian notion of epic theater. Now, epic theater, at the outset, Benjamin declares that is anti-Aristotelian in nature. This is a theater that, if you want to know about the epic theater in greater detail, I would advise you to read Benjamin's two versions of the essay called What is Epic Theater? But here, in this essay too, Benjamin, in a succinct manner, presents his views on epic theater. And according to him, Brechtian epic theater would possess certain distinct qualities. The first quality is, of course, this theater, Brechtian epic theater, would enter into debate with newer instruments. So theater would try to incorporate developments made in other realms of artistic activities. Theater would learn from radio. Theater would learn from newspapers. Theater would learn from films. And we'll talk about montage in a minute. So instead of carrying on with the long tradition of drama writing, epic theater would use technology in a major way. And secondly, as many of you perhaps know, that many of Brecht's famous works of drama are reworkings of earlier plays written by earlier dramatists. So that in a way draws our attention to the fact that in Brechtian epic theater, there is a tendency to dispense with wide-ranging plots. A gripping plot in most cases results in the creation of an illusion of reality. Now, Brechtian epic theater is first and foremost an anti-illusionist theater. That way, it is anti-Aristotelian. There is absolutely no intention on the part of the writer of an epic theater, of an epic dramatist, to arrive at any cathartic understanding of life. So, in a Brechtian epic theater, you would have interruptions. Interruptions would occur almost in a periodic manner to destroy any possible illusion that the dramatic performance could possibly throw up. So with the introduction of montage, now montage is a technique that was developed by the Soviet filmmakers. Sergei Eisenstein is famous for the introduction of the technique of montage. Montage is of course using of certain shots, certain non-linear shots to shots that are inserted into the flow of events in a film, or shots that would function like words of a sentence. So montage, the use of montage in the form of songs and in the form of comedy scenes would, and Benjamin gives a very clear example as what kind of interruptions he has in mind when he talks about epic theater. Now, he refers to one particular possible situation where we can possibly witness a family feud where the parents are having a quarrel, and the mother is trying to involve the daughter as well, and the father becomes afraid of the outcome of the quarrel. And at this crucial moment when everything is going to flare up, a stranger enters into the scene. So this way, the position of the stranger is like an interruption into the scene, which helps the audience, helps the viewer to create a distance from the action, from the moment of action, and to reflect on the action in a critical manner. So this is what is popularly known as alienation effect. Now, alienation effect in a Brechtian drama happens at various levels. In the level of dramaturgy, in the level of acting, actors do not act out their parts. They rather quote their parts. Actors also comment upon the predicaments of the roles that they play. And the viewers are also given to understand that the actors are not, actors are after all actors. They are simply playing their parts. So all these techniques, keeping the lights of the auditorium on, or to put the musicians on top of the stage, to use of placards and to make use of slogans, and to use song and dance sequences, and all kinds of techniques that Brecht would learn from other works of art like film and radio, are aimed at creating an anti-illusionist theater where members of the audience would also actively take part in the outcome of the action. It would help the public to think, to reflect, and to assume a new position in the process of production. So the audience, instead of remaining an inert audience, would become collaborators in the ultimate dramatic impact. Right. So coming back to the last section of the essay, here Benjamin is trying to sum up, after his discussion on the epic theater, he is trying to sum up the primary objectives that the artist should have, not only the artist, not only the authors, but also the critics, because during the 1930s, Benjamin was trying to establish himself as the foremost critic in German literature. So both for the writer as well as for the critic, the objectives are about the proletarization of the intellectual. The bourgeois intellectual, as I mentioned earlier, that the bourgeois intellectual cannot become like a working class person, cannot become a farmer. In Soviet Russia in the 1920s, uh, there was the slogan that became very popular, that writers to the farm. Benjamin does not believe in that. Benjamin understands that the use of educational privilege has created an insurmountable gap between the bourgeois artist and the working class people. But even then, the bourgeois artist, by changing his position in production relations, by becoming a producer, by changing the mode of production, uh, he or she can become an engineer of a productive apparatus. He can be the creator of new and more progressive productive apparatus than being merely a supplier of productive apparatus. In a capitalist system, if the artist, without changing the nature of the apparatus, if the artist keeps on using the apparatus, the technology has to throw up at him. The artist would work for the cause of the capitalist system. That cannot be called the position of a progressive writer. The intellectual and the producer, therefore, need to refunction the genres. So what Benjamin is trying to uh, put forward here is that not only that newer art forms are to be practiced by artists, but the artists also need to bring about fundamental changes to the older forms of art. So higher technical quality adopted by the artists, the authors, technical qualities aimed at bringing about the changes which would be helpful in the condition of a social revolution. These higher technical qualities in turn would become like right political tendency. So the essay seems to have a circuitous structure, a circular structure. Benjamin began with introducing an equation involving four nodal points: right political tendency, right literary tendency, literary quality, and literary technique. And at the very end, he solves this problem in a way by creating a situation where right technical quality becomes synonymous with the right kind of political tendency. And at the very last, in the very last sentence, Benjamin, uh, you know, uh, makes it absolutely clear. Uh, Mind you, that Benjamin was writing this essay as a lecture to be delivered in the Institute for the Study of Fascism. So, in the very end, Benjamin does not forget to mention that in the 20th century, modern technologized age, the struggle that the artist must fight involves a struggle between capitalism and working class, not between capitalism and spirit, which fascism would try to champion, would try to put forward. So again, you see, we hear echoes of the mechanical reproducibility essay in the very last of the author as producer essay, where in place of politicization of aesthetics, and Benjamin mentions the futurist artists, poets like Marinetti and others, and he, in contrast to that, posits his own position as a critical writer, the position involving aestheticization, the position of politicization of aesthetics in the form of epic theater. Right. So what we need to do, Benjamin seems to suggest that to do away with aestheticization of politics, we should not look at political events as aesthetically beautiful, but on the other hand, we should bring about political changes in the very aesthetic principles, in the very questions of the necessary qualities of art and the possible functions of art in society. Now, before I conclude, I would like to draw your attention to the possible contemporary relevance that this essay can have. We are reading this essay almost a century after Benjamin wrote this essay, and to my mind, this essay has got certain very powerful prognostic qualities. Benjamin anticipates certain developments that would take place in the Western world, not only in the Western world, but in the entire world in the next century. And his prognosis, many of his prognostic ideas turned out to be right. Now, the reform, and we, in this particular age, in the 21st century, we also, just as the kind of paradigm shift that Benjamin was witnessing in the beginning of the 20th century, with the introduction of films and other new media, similarly, we are also in an age in which we are in the middle of a paradigm shift, and where the reformulations of the relationship between art and society, the refunctioning of art once again becomes necessary, almost imperative. We live in the digital age, and what Benjamin understands as reproducibility, he mentions how a photograph can never ever capture the auratic quality of a painting. The photographic representation, the photographic reproduction of Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci's painting Mona Lisa, would never be able to capture the aura of that painting. That is what Benjamin had to say. But in this digital age, it is not quite the same, because if you go to the site called Google Art and Culture, you will find that Google, with the state-of-the-art cameras, they have already photographed thousands of paintings where the pixels are so high that the details of the photographs are astounding. So a viewer who would look at any such painting would be able to find out details of the painting which anybody seeing the painting from close quarters would not be able to see. So now we have entered into an age where reproducibility has reached a completely different level. So the paintings that we see through Google Art can be considered to be experiences which are richer and more detailed than seeing those paintings in museums. That is very, very interesting. And of course, with the introduction of digital technology, with the introduction of the internet, DSLRs, and the gaming culture, reproducibility and the mass production has reached its zenith. These days, we talk about data. We live in a data-driven world, and sometimes it is also said that data these days are more valuable than gold, than oil. So this is made possible by the arrival of the internet, digital cameras, and all kinds of technological advancements. I do not want to go into details of the nitty-gritties of these technological advancements, because I'm sure that many of my students who are listening to my talk know a lot more better, a lot more than what I know. So the technology of the green screen, the technology involving Photoshop, the technology of creating completely fake pictures are something that the digital technology has given us. So with smartphones, with YouTubes, with social media, anybody and everybody can become a performer. Anybody and everybody can contribute to the realm of art. I'm not talking about, well, the possible debasement of the work of art. We'll talk about that in a moment. But social media and YouTube and smartphones, these developments have democratized art like never before. So with MMMs, with MMS memes and the possibility of going viral, we have reached an age where the possibility of becoming a producer, it is very interesting to note that memes are all about, most often memes are all about using images with certain captions, with certain inscriptions. You use one particular image and then use a caption to make that image mean something completely different. Now, I find this meme culture quite similar to the culture of photography that Benjamin had to talk about in the author as producer essay. So again, I go back to the prognostic quality of the essay of Benjamin. And of course, with the arrival of the digital technology, we have reached a position where all new kinds of apparatuses are at the disposal of the artist. And that is why we have multimedia art. We have painters using digital imaging photography. We have performance art, which can be transmitted, which can be broadcast to different parts of the globe one at the same time. I'm thinking of art works done by someone like Maria Abramovich. And of course, mobile phone art. You do not require an easel, you do not require a paintbrush, not even a pencil or a pen. With a mobile phone, you can create paintings. So you have a number of technological advancement. You have a number of devices at your disposal. Now, Benjamin would ask you, if you consider yourself as an artist, as an intellectual, as a writer, Benjamin would ask yourself, you can write poems on Facebook. I mean, you can write you can also get involved in a collaborative work of writing a poem. You can contribute a few lines on your Facebook wall. Somebody else can contribute a few more lines. So what I'm trying to say is that you have a whole gamut of technological advancements. But the question is, what do you do with it? What do you do with all these technological advancements? Are you in a position to refunction these technological advancements? And in this age of lockdown, this question becomes all the more pertinent. We have discussed at length the art of theater just a little while ago, epic theater. And we all know in this particular age of lockdown, the art form that suffered most is, of course, the theater. So the theater houses are closed, theater companies are without jobs, performers cannot perform. So you see, all is not lost. If you consider the prognostic value of Benjaminian essay, Benjaminian ideas, how people all across the globe, performers all across the globe are trying to come up with alternative ways of communicating, of keeping the tradition of theater alive by creating a new theater form called interactive theater. And cinema halls are closed, but we all know that how OTT as a platform is becoming more and more popular. So it is possible to make use of new apparatuses to make art happen even during the age of lockdown. But again, the crux of the issue is, and this is the essence of the dialectical thinking of Benjamin, which involves a position where the possibility of the debasement of art, where art touches its lowest point. These days with YouTube stars, with TikTok stars, you have everybody becoming a performer. So in a way, quality is suffering. But for Benjamin, this debasement does not signify the end of hope, because this debasement also gives an opportunity for a possible revival of art, an art that would be democratic, an art that would have a political intent, an art that would be geared towards making the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dada, for this brilliant presentation on the changing relationship between art and technology. You have presented oil in this current scenario, and I think this is a very relevant topic. And you have summarized oil. It's true that everybody is becoming a performer nowadays using this technology like TikTok, WhatsApp. There are many other apps, and so Benjamin's we should not look down upon Benjamin's idea of that there is a possibility. So without further delay, I will invite questions from the participants, though they have already started to drop them down in the comment section of YouTube. So I'm just making it visible to your screen.
Tonmoy, do I get to hear the questions, or do I read those questions and then try to answer?
It is visible on your screen.
Yes, right. Now, as to the question of Shoikot Chakraborty, first of all, let me declare at the outset that this is a very relevant question. When I was reading Author as Producer, I was constantly reminded of Foucault's essay, What is an Author? But I personally don't think that Foucault in any way was influenced by Benjamin, simply because Benjamin's ideas were not that easily available at that point in time. And Foucault in any way wrote his essay to a certain extent in response to Barthes' essay, The Death of the Author. And for Foucault, the very idea of author function is related to his idea of discourses, and how author function keeps on changing when discursive patterns move from one episteme to another. So that is that takes, I think, Foucault's discussion to a different trajectory. And let me just also mention that Foucault makes a distinction between authors and transdiscursive authors. Transdiscursive authors, of course, those who initiate disciplines. He considers Karl Marx or Sigmund Freud as transdiscursive authors or initiators of discursive practices. But again, to go back to Shoikot's question, I think Foucault is more interested in the parameters of the discursive episteme out of which the author function emerges, and when we can possibly move from one author function to another. And that is why in the past, works of literature would not have names of authors, whereas scientific ideas would have to have the names of the scientists attached to them. And in the present day author function, we have just the opposite. We do not consider literary text to be authentic if we do not have the author's name inscribed in it, attached to it. Whereas a scientific theory, in order to be valid, has to be universal, has to be falsifiable, that is. I don't know whether I answered Shoikot's question or not. Yes, to move on to the next question, Rudrani's question, that is. Okay, right. I'm not quite sure about what Rudrani means by zero capital artistic content, in the sense that no matter how strongly you believe that internet services or certain softwares come for free, we tend to believe that creating a YouTube account or uploading a YouTube account or creating a TikTok video doesn't cost much. They come for free. No, I don't think that is the case, because After all, at the end of the day, you have to buy data, and so the data provider, they earn money by selling data to you. And if you consider watching the OTT platform, the web series, have you noticed the fact that you buy your internet connectivity with a certain sum of money, but when you subscribe to the channels, the web channels, you also have to subscribe to those web channels with a certain kind of money. So it turns out to be that for the same set of data, you are paying two uh, capitalist entrepreneurs. So I don't understand what you mean by zero capital. Yes, on the other hand, if you mean that in order to create a video in these softwares, you do not require to invest money in terms of props and others, or you can do it on your own. Uh, well, I can understand that, but uh, even then, I would say that if you consider the possibilities, the democratic possibilities of these technologies, and if you can make use of these democratic possibilities to the fullest, I think that and that is why these days we talk about digital democracy. That is why we talk about one particular video going viral to any part of the world in minutes. So that way, I think Benjamin's idea of changing the modes of production by creating a new kind of force of production uh, represented by the creator of that particular art object stands valid. Yes, Tolma, any other question? Yes, this is related to Benjamin's understanding of our understanding of popular culture vis-a-vis Benjamin. Now, if you want to restrict the discussion to author as producer essay, my answer would be of one kind. But if you take the entire corpus of Benjamin's writings, my answer would be different. Here, as I have mentioned during my discussion, that Benjamin puts enormous faith, I would say too much faith, on the potential, the revolutionary potential of technology. But in reality, that was not really the case. 1930s was also the decade in which Hitler, with the help of documentary filmmakers, was able to make propaganda documentaries that created enormous impact among his followers and raised his popularity to stratosphere, to a very high point. So, as far as the essay author as producer is concerned, technology is at the cornerstone of Benjamin's understanding of society, culture, and historical changes. But if you consider Benjamin of the late period, if you consider Benjamin of the writer of the thesis on the philosophy of history, where he talks about messianic time, there instead of technology, he highlights the possibility of creating a time which is, qualitatively different. He calls it messianic time. So popular culture, I think the way it exists today would have impressed Benjamin, but at the same time, Benjamin would have been a little bit apprehensive about about a machine going rogue. I mean, the power of popular culture these days is so great that it would be difficult for one artist or a group of artists to change the direction of the popular culture, to bring about large-scale societal changes. Yes, going to Devobroto's question, seems like barrage of questions, one after another. Well,
This is the last questions we are taking.
right. No, yes, I need to clarify a few points here. I think I need to go back to the text once more. Now, when Benjamin talks about technologized art forms like technologized media like cinema or a newspaper, as a writer, as an ordinary writer or as an ordinary filmmaker, it is not possible to buy off the newspaper company or the film company, right? But as a writer of a newspaper, it is possible to bring about ruptures. Just a little while ago, we were talking about Barth. We were talking about his essay, Death of the Author. Now, those of you who are familiar with Barth's works would know that many of Barth's essays, writings, were published in newspapers. Similarly, Benjamin's short pieces were meant for journalistic writing. So, newspaper can offer us now. So, newspaper can be a space, can be a particular platform where a serious author with serious intention can make ruptures, and for that the author does not have to take sides with the privileged elite class. So it's like fighting a battle which is similar to the guerrilla warfare. Now these mass produced media can give you the opportunity to arrive at a position of agency, which in the 19th century bourgeois art form, it was rather difficult to achieve. Yes, so was it
Yes,
the last question?
yeah, it was the last question. We are stopping taking question as we don't know why we will get disconnected. A heavy storm going on outside. So now I request our student Davasmita Tripathi, Davasmita Mighty. It's for time for the formal vote of thanks. Now I request Davasmita to offer Sir the formal vote of thanks.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone. I am Debushmita
Good evening.
Maitri, student of 6th semester Midnapur College. First of all, I would like to thank on behalf of our department, Professor Dr. Dipankar Roy, Associate Professor of Visva Bharati, whose enlightened lecture has greatly enriched all of us surely. We are really grateful, sir, and feel fortunate to have you in our session. It was a pleasure to listen to your words. I would like to convey my deep regards to our Honorable Principal, Dr. Gopal Chandra Bera, whose copious permission has enabled this beautiful session. We are thankful to him. I would like to thank our Professor Tonmoy Kundu for organizing this online lecture series and uniting all the students, teachers, scholars in this adverse situation. And last but not the least, thank you all the participants across the country for joining the session and made it a success. Well, that's all. Thank you again and have a nice day, sir.
Thank you, Debushmita. Thank you indeed. Yes, Tonman.